The night was thick with the scent of burning oil and gunpowder. Crickets had long been silenced by the hum of distant tanks and the sporadic cracks of gunfire. The village where Abbasi was born no longer had a name, only ashes, silence, and the fading screams of memory. At 27, he had seen more corpses than birthdays. Abbasi's home had been obliterated 2 weeks earlier. His mother's hands, which once braided his hair and fed him rice with sweet peanut sauce, now lay beneath a collapsed wall of scorched bricks. He had tried to dig her out with his bare hands, screaming into the dusty air until his throat tore. But there was no saving her. No saving anyone. The war, like a slow poison, had crept across their country, and then swallowed it whole. And yet, in the middle of that despair, Abbasi had one thing left. Hope. Not the soft kind that comes from stories or religion. This was the brutal, desperate kind of hope that claws at your chest when death feels too easy. A hope that drives men to do the impossible. That was how he found himself at the edge of an airstrip in the capital city, hiding in a drainage pipe with rats and mold, watching planes scream into the sky. He had heard the rumor from a dying soldier. The Americans fly out aid and cargo to Europe, sometimes to Canada. If you find a way inside, they won't know until it's too late. It sounded like suicide. But Abbasi had nothing left. No home, no family, no future. Only this one wild, insane chance. For 3 nights he watched the airport through a rusted hole in the fence, memorizing the patrol routes, the lights, the blind spots, the one guard who smoked too often and moved too slowly. On the 4th night it rained, hard, and in the chaos of thunder and static Abbasi moved. He crawled through mud and wire, past broken fences, heart pounding in his throat. Every shadow could be a soldier, every gust of wind could hide a bullet, but nothing stopped him. He reached the tarmac just as a massive aircraft, painted with UN markings and loaded with cargo, roared to life. He ran. No plan, no time. The landing gear was already retracting as he reached it. With hands blistered and raw, he grabbed onto the struts, hauling himself into the undercarriage like a man possessed. The metal was freezing, slick with grease. But he wedged himself into the narrow cavity, curling into a ball, hiding among the pipes and steel. He didn't feel the plane take off. He was too focused on not slipping, on not screaming, on not dying. But soon, the shaking stopped. The noise changed, and he knew. They were in the sky. Then the cold came. Not the kind of cold he'd ever known in Africa. Not the chill of desert nights or wet monsoons. This was airless, cruel, cosmic cold. His sweat turned to ice, his breath to vapor. His fingers stopped feeling like fingers. His heartbeat slowed, and still, he clung. He thought of his mother's eyes, of her whispering, "One day you will go far, my son, so far that even the stars won't reach you." Was this what she meant? The pain in his body turned to numbness. His vision blurred. Everything slowed. He thought he was dying. Maybe he was, but someone kept him alive. Hours later, how many, he didn't know, the plane touched down with a jolt. The impact rattled every bone in his body. One of his fingers dislocated. His nose bled. But he was alive. Alive. The door beneath him hissed open. Light poured in. Fresh, icy air filled his lungs, and then came the voices. English, French. He didn't understand much. But he understood one thing. He had made it. Canada. Snow fell like feathers around him as his shivering body collapsed to the runway. Someone screamed. A medic ran. And then, darkness. The plane thundered down the runway, the wind howling like a beast at full fury. Inside the narrow crawl space of the landing gear, Adisa's body trembled uncontrollably, not from fear anymore, but from the brutal cold and the overwhelming pressure. His fingers were already numb, and his legs had gone stiff in the fetal position he had forced himself into. As the aircraft lifted off the ground, he felt the sudden jolt of weightlessness, then a violent slam upward as the landing gear retracted. He was now locked inside a steel coffin thousands of feet in the air. There was no going back. Minutes into the flight, his body began to shut down. The temperature outside was dropping fast, plummeting to minus 50 degrees Celsius. The air was thin. Breathing became a battle. He gasped, desperate for oxygen, each breath shallower than the last. His heartbeat slowed. Time blurred. Reality slipped through his fingers like sand. In that near-death trance, Adisa's mind turned to memories. His father, tall and proud, telling stories by firelight, his mother's lullaby, soft as morning rain, his younger brother, Kofi, killed in front of him by a militia when he refused to join their ranks. The blood, the screams, the silence afterward. It had all led him here. He remembered the day his village was destroyed, by bombs, by men shouting in a language foreign to their land, guided by drones and alliances that made no sense to people like him. The war wasn't theirs, but they paid the price. He remembered the American flag patch on the soldier's arm. "You're not even fighting for your country," Adisa had whispered that day. The soldier didn't answer. The cold in the wheel well reached a point beyond pain. He could no longer feel his hands or feet. His face was ice. And then, darkness. Adisa's heart stopped. At cruising altitude, many stowaways die. Their bodies are found frozen or fall mid-air when the gear lowers. Few survive. But fate, for reasons unknown, held on to Adisa. After hours of unconsciousness, the plane began its descent. The landing gear deployed, and with it came a gust of slightly warmer air. The shift in motion jarred Adisa's body. His eyelids fluttered. A weak groan escaped his lips. He was still alive. Barely. The plane landed in Toronto. On the tarmac, a maintenance worker doing a routine check spotted something unusual. A dangling foot, frostbitten and blue. Alarms went off. Authorities rushed in, expecting the worst. But when they pulled him from the compartment, his eyes opened. The medics couldn't believe it. He had survived. His core temperature was dangerously low. His limbs were blackened by frostbite. His lungs were starved for oxygen, but his heart was beating. He had made it to Canada. In the hospital, Adisa was in and out of consciousness for days. When he finally woke up, he was surrounded by nurses and doctors who had no idea who he was. He couldn't speak English, but his eyes said everything. One nurse held his hand as he wept. He had no passport, no papers, no identity, only a story. And it started to spread. The news picked it up. Stowaway found alive in plane landing gear, a miracle survival. Photos of his frostbitten body flooded headlines. Journalists speculated. Some dismissed him as a criminal. Others called him an angel spared by heaven. But those who sat by his side, doctors, trauma counselors, knew the truth. He was just a man who had run out of options. Adisa slowly began to recover. He lost parts of his toes and one finger due to frostbite. But he could walk. He could speak. And one day, with the help of a translator, he told his story. And Canada listened. An immigration lawyer named Sarah Mulrooney took his case pro bono. She sat beside him as he testified before the asylum board. When he described the bodies in the river, the bombs, the shattered villages, she cried. He risked his life not for luxury, she told the board, but for survival. After weeks of deliberation, the Canadian government granted him asylum on humanitarian grounds. He was no longer just a survivor. He was now a resident. But freedom is more than papers. Adisa had to rebuild. He had no home, no family, no language, no career. At first he worked in kitchens, silent, invisible, grateful. Then he cleaned floors in offices after midnight. He lived in a shared room in a refugee housing center. But every day he learned English words, Canadian customs, the rules of a new world. One winter evening, while walking home from work, Adisa saw a flyer for a trauma support group at a local church. Curious, he went inside, and something changed. He heard other war survivors speak. Syrians, Ukrainians, Rwandans, Afghans. They shared pain, loss, hope. And for the first time, Adisa opened his mouth to speak. In broken English, he told them about the cargo hold, about the freezing dark, about the ghosts he carried. They listened. They welcomed him. He began attending every week. Eventually, he volunteered to help new refugees arriving in the city. He guided them through paperwork, translated when needed, held hands when they broke down. He had no degree, no prestige, but he had truth, and truth heals. 1 year later, Adisa was invited to speak at an immigration conference in Ottawa. Nervous but proud, he stood before a room full of policymakers, lawyers, journalists, and fellow survivors. He held up a photo of the landing gear compartment where he almost died. "This," he said slowly, "was my door to freedom." A silence fell, and then a standing ovation. The same week, a high school invited him to speak. Then a university. Then the CBC requested an interview. Adisa's name began to spread, not as a victim, but as a voice. He never sought fame. But he used his platform to talk about war, displacement, and the invisible lives lost between borders. He started a nonprofit to support refugees with trauma therapy and reintegration help. He partnered with local churches, shelters, and clinics. And every time he was asked why he risked his life in that wheel well, he always gave the same answer. Because hope was the only thing I had left. The moment the wheels hit the tarmac in Canada, Malik felt a violent jolt surge through his frozen limbs. A cracking sound echoed in his ears. He couldn't tell if it came from the landing gear or his own bones. His vision blurred from the sharp sting of icy wind and lack of oxygen. But somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. Malik's body convulsed as the plane slowed. He clung to consciousness by threads, his skin pale from frostbite, his fingernails blackening, his heart barely beating. When the aircraft finally stopped at the gate, Malik had no strength to climb down. His body sagged, wedged in the cold metal cradle where he'd hidden for over 9 hours. He passed out. Discovery. A baggage handler noticed something unusual, what looked like a jacket sleeve caught inside the compartment. Then came the horror of realizing it wasn't cloth. It was a human hand. Security swarmed the area. At first, they thought it was a corpse, but when one officer leaned closer, Malik's chest barely rose and fell. He was alive. Barely. An ambulance arrived. The paramedics gasped when they saw him, his face swollen, his lips dark blue. No ID, no passport, just a folded piece of paper inside his shirt with a phone number scrawled across it in trembling handwriting. It read, "If I die, tell my sister Miriam I tried." The ER fought to stabilize him. Doctors said it was a miracle. Most who attempt what Malik did don't survive, but Malik wasn't just anyone. He had defied war. He had defied death. He had defied gravity. Recovery. It took weeks for Malik to recover consciousness. When he finally opened his eyes, they were met with a white ceiling and the soft hum of machines. A nurse named Clara was sitting by his bed, holding a warm cloth to his frostbitten fingers. "You're safe now," she whispered. Those words cracked something inside him. For the first time in years, Malik cried. Not from pain, not from fear, from relief. He had made it. He had left behind the sounds of rockets, the smells of burning homes, the screams in the night. He was in a country where no one knew him. And yet, for the first time, he felt human. The doctors told him he would lose 3 toes. His hearing might be affected, but he would live. He learned that he had landed in Montreal. He was granted temporary medical asylum while his case was reviewed. A translator was brought in to help him tell his story. When the officer asked why he did what he did, Malik simply said, "I chose death over war, and the sky gave me life instead." The fight for asylum. Even with media coverage and public sympathy, the asylum process was brutal. Malik's claim was questioned, challenged, delayed. He was told he might be deported. Activists rallied for him. Journalists covered his story. People donated to his legal fund. But the moment that changed everything came during his asylum hearing. The judge asked, "Why didn't you apply through legal channels?" Malik answered softly, "Because I would be dead by now if I waited." His lawyer presented footage of the war, testimonies from survivors, and proof that Malik's village no longer existed. They even tracked down Mariam, his sister, now living in a refugee camp in Ethiopia. A month later, Malik was granted permanent asylum. He wept again, a new beginning. 2 years later, Malik walks with a slight limp, the result of frostbite, but he walks proudly. He works as a dishwasher in a local restaurant in Montreal by day. By night, he studies English and volunteers with a refugee aid group. He speaks to new arrivals, tells them his story, offers them hope. He eventually began speaking at universities. "You don't need to hide in an airplane to be seen," he told a group of students once. But I did. And now that I am seen, I will never disappear again. Malik has written a book titled Sky Between Us, a memoir of war, escape, and survival. The proceeds go to fund evacuation routes for others fleeing war zones. Legacy. One winter morning, he stood at the edge of an airfield, watching a plane take off into the gray Canadian sky. He clutched his coat tighter, still wary of the cold. He whispered to no one, "I forgive the sky." And then, in a small apartment filled with books, warmth, and life, he called Miriam. She was finally approved to come to Canada. After all these years, his family would be whole again. Epilogue. Malik's story isn't just about survival. It's about endurance, love, and the impossible choice between staying to die or escaping to maybe live. He chose hope, and the sky, though cruel, carried him to freedom. Now Malik speaks for those who never made it, for the frozen bodies found in wheel wells, for the nameless souls buried in forgotten soil, because he lived, and because he will never stop telling their stories.